Did you just hear those ads? Do you not want to? Because Crimelines is available ad-free on Supercast, Patreon, and Apple subscriptions. You will also get access to my other twice-monthly podcast, Beyond the Files. That's where I take cases that were covered on Forensic Files and tell you the rest of the story. Links to those platforms are in the show notes. In 2005, Allie Gilmore separated from her husband and began a casual relationship with another man. But when she and her husband started to reconcile, she went missing. Over 15 years later, a suspect was named, but the evidence needed for an arrest remains elusive. I'm Charlie, and welcome to Crimelines. Welcome back to Crimelines, and hello if you're new here and this is your first episode. I usually cover a mix of solved and unsolved crimes, but because this is the second Wednesday of the month, it means I am covering a cold case. This one does have a call to action from the authorities, and we'll get to that at the end. Let's first get started with Allie Grimsley, who was born in January of 1976. Though the pronunciation is not the same, Allie was named after Muhammad Ali, and that's where the spelling of her name comes from. Allie's father was not involved in her life, and her mother, Lorvetta, was still sorting some things out for herself. So for the first 11 years or so, Allie was raised by a cousin. But eventually her mother did take the steps she needed to stabilize her own life and, by extension, her daughter's. She became a nurse, she got married, and she set up a home in Riviera Beach, Florida, so the family was reunited. Allie was an excellent student, and it's been reported that she got up at 5 a.m. every day just to get ready for school in time, to take the bus 45 minutes to her high school, and how amazing it was that she did that. And it is true, and it is amazing she did that, but turns out she didn't do it by choice. Palm Beach County schools, like a lot of schools in the 1990s, were dealing with an issue of segregation. Not forced segregation like we think of from before the Brown versus Topeka Board of Education ruling, but rather what we still see today. Within the same school district, they would have school populations that were overwhelmingly made up of white students and others that were overwhelmingly made up of black students. The solution proposed in many of these areas were busing programs, where students would not attend their local school, but rather be sent to a school that is, to be blunt, lacking in racial diversity. There is a lot that went into these programs from a federal level, from a state level, from a city level, and I don't have time to get into all of that. But the relevant part is that these programs often disproportionately impacted black students. They were the ones that were being bused to other schools. Students from Riviera Beach, where Allie lived, were being bused to 19 different schools throughout the county. Historically, that's how integration and desegregation has gone. The black community bears the brunt. So think about it. When schools were initially desegregated after Brown v. Board of Education, it wasn't the white schools that closed, or the white teachers who were out of work. It was the black schools and the black teachers. And I do have an on-topic point here. I'm not just bringing up history for the fun of it, even though I do tend to do that. I found an article about this issue in the Palm Beach Post from 1991. I was just looking in the newspaper archives, newspapers.com, of course, for any time Allie's name came up during her childhood to see what kind of things she was involved in. And when Allie was 15, she stood up to speak to the Board of Education about the impact this busing program had on her. Allie got emotional when she talked about her schedule. She had to get on the bus at 6:30 in the morning, which meant she would wake up around 5 to get ready. If she slept in, she would have to leave home without eating breakfast just to get to the bus stop in time. And then during track season, because she did run track, broke some records for the school, but during that season, she would then have to wait until there was a 6 p.m. bus to bring her home. Traffic at that time of the day is worse than in the morning, so she wouldn't get home until after 7 p.m. By the time she ate and got her homework done, she wouldn't be in bed until midnight, only to have to do the same thing all over again the next morning. She was there to speak against busing after it was proposed to redistrict in a way that would make her go to yet another school. She had just started making friends at Jupiter, and it's not like they were saying, okay, well, you can attend your local high school. They were just going to bus her somewhere else, same schedule, knowing nobody. By speaking to the board, Allie showed them the human face to what they were doing. She wasn't a demographic. She was not a racial identity they can move around to hit certain numbers. She was a very real 15-year-old, trying her best. And her best is what she did. In spite of this schedule, she was an honor student and a star athlete. She even managed a small part-time job at the local Publix grocery store, and then she graduated high school early. In 1993, at the age of 17, Allie moved to Tallahassee to attend Florida A&M University. This was a 6-hour drive from Riviera Beach, so it was a huge change for her at a young age. She went from a 25,000-person beach town on the East Coast to a city with 5 times more people in North Florida. Being that she was so close to her family, this distance was an adjustment for all of them. But Allie loved it in Tallahassee. She majored in health information management and even transferred to the local Publix. Between financial aid and working in the Publix bakery, Allie was able to put herself through school. After graduation, she got a job with the State Department of Health, but she did keep working that Publix job part-time for some extra income. Allie's coworkers at both jobs loved her. She was upbeat and fun to be around, but she was also incredibly empathetic. She would go the extra mile for someone else. An example given is that one of her coworkers told her that she'd be alone for Thanksgiving that year because it cost too much to fly home for the holiday. But even if she did fly home, it might be more pain than joy because her parents had died. A family holiday without them, with everyone else around, might actually be worse than being alone. But Allie just could not imagine her friends sitting alone on a holiday. So Allie insisted she come with her to Riviera Beach. So the two took this 6-hour road trip. They had a lot of fun together. And then Allie and her family treated this coworker just like she was family. So instead of having this depressing holiday and a long weekend alone, she ended up having a great time because Allie and her family did all they could to make sure of that. Allie had a great group of friends in Tallahassee, and she dated here and there, but it wasn't until late 1999 that she fell for someone pretty hard. Allie was 23 years old, and she was at the mall shopping. She stopped by one of those kiosks because she was looking to get her diploma framed. Now, working at the framing booth was 27-year-old James Gilmore, who was a divorced father of 3. He noticed Allie the first time she was there, but it was when she stopped by for the second time that he decided to ask her for her phone number. Allie gave it to him, and the two began dating. And the relationship got pretty serious pretty quickly. They had only been dating about 8 months when James surprised her with a proposal. They were walking in the mall one day, and when they got to the spot where they first met, he got down on one knee. Allie said yes, and they didn't opt for a long engagement. They were married on October 7th, 2000. At the time they married, according to James, he wasn't really going anywhere career-wise. He was bouncing from one low-paying, entry-level job to the next. He never thought of higher education as something within his reach, but Allie definitely didn't see it that way. She saw potential. With Allie's support and encouragement, James enrolled in college. With Allie working 2 jobs and James working 1 job while also going to school, the two managed to save enough to buy a cute 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in August of 2004. This was a brand new home in a new development on the south side of Tallahassee. Allie and James talked over the years about having children. He already had 3. But he was open to having another one or two. It wasn't just that he wanted to have kids with Allie. He really wanted her to have a chance to be a mother. She loved kids and very much wanted to be a parent. That said, they weren't really in a rush given that they were both so busy with work and/or school. But in the summer of 2005, a year after buying their home, Allie found out she was pregnant. The two were thrilled about it, and Allie started buying little baby things right away. But then she had a miscarriage. Allie was devastated, of course, and it compounded some stressors that were already present in the marriage. The main one being financial. Allie was working full-time at one job and part-time at another. James was in school full-time and working full-time, but he was also paying child support for 3 children. This meant Allie was the main breadwinner, but the stress of that was getting to her. She didn't want to work 2 jobs. She didn't want to leave one job at 5 just to show up to the other at 6 to work to 11, and then be home just long enough to sleep before repeating it. She already lived that life in high school with that busing situation. She was ready to not work that hard just to stay afloat. Some of the stress would naturally be resolved in another year or 2 when James finished school. But James admitted that they were not communicating well as things were getting rocky. I mean, they were both barely home and juggling so much, so the time and the energy to communicate was probably non-existent. Then, after the miscarriage, the two were arguing more than ever, and James felt like Allie was putting a lot of pressure on him to get a better paying job. And he was trying, but they weren't panning out. In October of 2005, James said he was fed up with the arguing and he moved in with his brother. Shortly after Allie and James separated, Allie went to the FAMU homecoming, and while there, she met 24-year-old Dwight Aldridge. The two spent at least one night together that weekend, and she even told her sister that she had met someone. At this point, James and Allie were not speaking to each other. They went several weeks without communicating at all, upwards of 2 months. And when they did talk after that time, Allie told James that she found out she was pregnant again, and she was due in mid-July 2006. As the two talked, they decided that it was worth it to both of them to attend some marriage counseling sessions to decide whether they wanted to reconcile or continue with the separation heading towards divorce. There was a major issue they would need to work through, and that was that Allie wasn't sure if James was the father of the baby or if it was Dwight. There are some indications that Allie may have thought it was more likely that Dwight was the baby's father. For one, she told him first before she told James, and then he also went with her to an early ultrasound shortly after she found out she was pregnant. Allie was honest and upfront with James about this paternity question, and once he processed what that meant in the big picture, he decided he didn't really care if the baby was his or not. He loved Allie, and if there was a way they could make things work and get back together and be together as a family, he was fine if the baby wasn't biologically his. And his response, his acceptance of this pregnancy, was a bit different than the response Dwight gave. Now, Dwight and Allie's relationship was casual, and he was seeing other people during this time that he was seeing Allie. And when he found out she was pregnant, he wanted her to have an abortion. But that was not something Allie was open to. She very much wanted this baby, and so she was going to keep it. Taking everything in, Allie also felt, like James did, for the sake of the baby, for the sake of the love she had for James, it was worth it to try to work on their marriage. I'm sure it helped that James seemed more interested in being a father at that point than Dwight did. We know Allie was still seeing Dwight at least until the holidays, because in an email to her sister on December 20th, she wrote that she was still talking to Dwight a few times a week and they were still seeing each other occasionally. She did mention that the paternity issue was stressing her out, as was anxiety from her previous miscarriage. Being pregnant after having had a pregnancy loss was the most anxious I have ever been, so I understand her feelings here. But even with the stress of the overall situation and that anxiety, Allie was still very excited about the baby, and she was hoping she was having a girl. She had her anatomical ultrasound scheduled for Valentine's Day, where she would find out if the baby was growing well, but also find out if she was having a boy or a girl. These ultrasounds, which happen about midway through your pregnancy, are very exciting because it's the first time you get a peek at your baby looking like a baby and not like a little bean. So she was very much looking forward to that day. In January of 2006, ahead of that, Allie and James did start their marriage counseling to see if they could work on their issues. And based on what is publicly available, it is unclear her status with Dwight at this time, if they were still speaking, if they were still seeing each other. We don't know based on what has been released. James and Allie had another counseling session scheduled for Friday, February 3rd, which was probably pretty good timing because she definitely had something she needed to talk about. The day before, on the 2nd, she had gone to work pretty upset because she had gotten a notice that her property taxes were going up, and not by a little. This was going to be a significant amount, even spread out over the year, and she was already working so hard to make ends meet. With a baby on the way, expenses were only going to go up, and she had no idea how she was going to afford this increase. She talked to some people that day to try to come up with a plan, but since financial issues had also been a problem with James and Allie, this was a perfect opportunity for them to go to marriage counseling and learn how to communicate about them. But that would have to wait to the next day because Allie's day was not over yet. Around 5 p.m., she left her job at the Department of Health and headed to Publix for her 6 to 11 evening shift. She bought 2 slices of pizza for dinner from Pizza Hut, but she didn't finish them. At 8:45, Allie and James spoke on the phone while she was still at work, and she reminded him that they had the counseling appointment the next day at 9 a.m. Allie then finished her shift and headed home around 11. The next morning, 9 a.m. came and went, and neither Allie nor James showed up for their counseling appointment. According to James, he had been up too late the night before and overslept. He woke up around 11 a.m. and immediately called Allie when he realized what time it was. She didn't answer, but he was not surprised. He figured she'd be mad at him for missing the appointment, so he left a message apologizing profusely. Allie's coworkers knew she had the appointment in the morning, so they expected her to come in late, but then she didn't show up at all. They noticed because it was odd for her to not come without calling and letting them know that she was sick, but they thought maybe the counseling appointment had been stressful. They knew she was upset the day before because of the tax increase, so it sounded like they were thinking that she just needed some space. When Allie didn't call James back, he tried to reach her a few more times, including the next day on Saturday morning. And when Allie still wouldn't answer his calls, he drove over to the house to try to talk to her in person and apologize. He was worried that she interpreted him not coming to the appointment as a sign that he didn't care, and he really wanted to make it clear that he did care, and that he wanted to reconcile, and the best way to do that was to show up. He saw Allie's vehicle in the driveway when he got there, but she wasn't home. No one heard from Allie all weekend, which was unusual because she was known for being in regular contact with her family, either on the phone or even through email. She was known for sending little supportive and inspiring emails to people to cheer them up, but none came that weekend. It wasn't until Monday that Allie was reported missing. She did not show up to work that morning, and when her boss and coworker went out to the house, she wasn't there. It sounds like they may have tried to go into the house because they noted that it was locked, and the only lights that were on were the front porch light and a bedroom light. Otherwise, the house was quiet. They then knocked on the neighbors' doors to see if they knew anything. Had they seen anyone come and go from Allie's house? Did they know that she was going out of town? Anything at all? No one knew or saw a thing, so they called the police. The police arrived on the scene and assessed the house. They saw there was no sign of a break-in anywhere, and aside from one window, everything was locked. They made entry, and the inside looked just as normal as the outside. There was no evidence of a struggle, no blood, anything like that. It was clear that Allie had made it home from work on Thursday night, because in the fridge they found her leftover pizza from dinner, and her Publix uniform was in the bedroom. Her blankets were turned down on one side, and there was a pregnancy book nearby, so it looked like Allie came home from work that night, changed out of her uniform, and climbed into bed with a book. But what had been released in the first 15 years of this investigation, it seemed as though she just vanished from that spot. Her car was still in the driveway, and inside was her purse that had her wallet and her work keys. The only thing that appeared to be missing were her house keys. So had Allie been in the middle of reading before bed when something interrupted her? With her house keys missing and that front porch light on, it did look like maybe she got up and left to go somewhere. Maybe she couldn't sleep from all the stress and decided to go for a late night walk and something happened, or maybe someone picked her up. With these possibilities in mind, the police started a large ground search in Tallahassee, first focusing on her neighborhood. Because it was a new neighborhood, there were vacant houses and some under construction, so they searched all of them. When Allie's family was contacted and learned she was missing, they immediately drove to Tallahassee to figure out what was going on and join in the search. They went into public awareness mode. They printed up flyers, they made yard signs to put around town, and they started canvassing neighborhoods in Tallahassee. They were able to do this so quickly because they had experience with it. Allie's cousin was the mayor of her hometown, and like a lot of local politicians, he used family to help when it came to campaigning. So they knew how to get someone's name and face out to the public. But then days and weeks passed without any clue as to where Allie went. They needed to reach more than just witnesses around the area. They needed a larger media campaign. The Class Kids group in Pensacola started pitching in to help, even though Allie was an adult. Mark Class said that they don't turn anyone away. Everyone is somebody's child, even if they're no longer technically a kid. Thankfully, the local media jumped in to get the word out. The Tallahassee Democrat ran regular articles, even if the only update was that there was a vigil or someone added money to a reward fund. They did have reward funds through Publix, who had offered it, and her stepfather Carl's job also added money. By April, the reward sat at over $30,000. And these rewards were publicized thanks to the Tallahassee Democrat, which stayed on this case early on. They got on this case and they stayed on it. They were a big source for this episode. Eventually, national media started airing segments on the case, and that includes Dateline, Nancy Grace, and Anderson Cooper. The family told the media that they were holding on to hope. One friend said that she hoped Allie just left to get away from all the stress and get her head together. That was out of character for Allie to do that, and she would never have left her family worrying like this. But it seemed like any other explanation led to a conclusion no one wanted. In April, 2 months after Allie disappeared, there was a massive search of a national forest near Tallahassee. They brought in K-9 units and 100 specialized searchers. It's not been made public if a specific lead led them in that direction, and if anything was found, that has also not been made public. 5 months after Allie disappeared, on what would have been her due date, her family dedicated a tree to her at Lake Ella in Tallahassee. Searches of hospitals for Allie having sought any prenatal care or showing up in labor yielded nothing. So let's get to the obvious thing you've been thinking since the intro of this episode, the investigation into the men in her life, primarily James Gilmore and Dwight Aldridge. As for James, he was the estranged husband who didn't know if his wife was carrying his baby or not, and he missed that counseling appointment the morning after Allie appeared to have gone missing. He was at his brother's house where he was staying, and he was sleeping. They were able to confirm his alibi as much as any overnight alibi can be confirmed, and there was nothing that disproved it, like cell phone records showing him near Allie's house. The closest they had was a neighbor of Allie's who thought he saw James's car in the driveway on Friday morning. We know James was there on Saturday morning looking for Allie, so my first thought was that he was just mixing up his days. But he said he saw the car at 7:30 when he left to bring his daughter to school, and it was gone when he got back at 8:10. He wouldn't have done those things on a Saturday when there is no school, so he likely did not mix it up with Saturday. The neighbor said he was about 90% sure he saw the car in the driveway on Friday. So this would lend itself to the theory that Allie got up in the morning and James picked her up for the counseling session, but they never made it there. That said, the car the neighbor saw could have just been a car that looked like James's car, or he was mistaken on the day it happened, and it was a different morning that week. Allie was last seen on a Thursday night. This neighbor thought he saw the car on Friday, but the investigation didn't start until Monday. It's not clear to me which day this statement was taken, but it would have had to have been at least 3 days later, if not 4 or even 5. So thinking about it right now, can you remember what car was parked in your neighbor's driveway 3 days ago, 4 days ago? Can you remember this morning? I walked my kids to school this morning, and I can't think of a single car that I passed. To James's credit, he did cooperate fully with the police, and he attended vigils and crime awareness events, and he spoke with the media. He said it was hard to have to talk about everything over and over again, but that Allie deserves all the attention on her case that they could get, and the way you get that attention is to have family members willing to speak. James was not paying attention to a lot of the online discourse in this case, though, and he said it was a year later that he came across some online comments section that was discussing how suspicious he looked. He didn't realize that putting himself out there so much would raise eyebrows, but I do want to tell him that not talking would have done the exact same thing. When you are the husband of a missing woman, right or wrong, online commentary on your actions is going to happen. Erring on the side of caution of getting Allie's name and case out there is going to be for the best. It was behind the scenes that James was quietly trying to deal with a lot of the same financial issues that occur in other missing persons cases. There is no easy legal mechanism to take control of accounts, to either keep things going for the missing person or to sell things and settle what is essentially their estate. There is no probate court for missing people. In the UK, since 2017, they have had Claudia's Law, aka the Guardianship Missing Persons Act. It is named for Claudia Lawrence, and I covered her case in February of 2022 if you want to go listen to it. This act allows someone to go to court and be declared the guardian over a missing person's estate. It gives us a legal process to do this without a whole lot of back and forth. It is a relatively new law, even in the UK, and it is hardly considered widespread. James found himself in legal limbo when he moved back into the house that he and Allie owned after she went missing. A year down the road, and he was not keeping up with the mortgage. The house was going to be foreclosed on. He couldn't afford it on his own, and he couldn't use any of her money to try to save it. And this came up in another episode I covered back in September of 2020, the Paul Skiba case. His mother was trying to keep his house going by paying his mortgage that she could barely afford, but there was only so much she could do until he was missing long enough to declare him dead. Allie's family did not want to take steps this drastic because they felt it was too early to move on like she wasn't coming home, which is fully understandable. The two sides ended up in court over it, and eventually James was given control, but the house still ended up being foreclosed on. In the end, it doesn't look like James gained anything from Allie's disappearance, and you could say he lost quite a bit. The other person the police were looking at was Dwight Aldridge. Dwight only spoke to the media once, saying that he and Allie were just friends, and that is pretty much what he told the police. Though their relationship was physically intimate, it was still just casual. But something came out years later to show why the police considered Dwight a more likely person of interest than James. This information first came from the family, not the police, and the authorities actually would not confirm or deny it. And that was that phone records, according to the family, showed that Allie had gotten a phone call at 12:47 a.m., nearly 2 hours after she left work the last night she was seen. The family did not know who made this call, and like I said, the police would not even confirm it happened. And then, finally, in 2021, 15 years after Allie disappeared, the investigators both confirmed that phone call and said who made it. It was Dwight. And they gave out more information than they had in the past, as they were also announcing that Dwight had gone from a person of interest to a suspect. Dwight had been questioned specifically about this phone call. He said he did make the call, but he was at home at the time. He didn't leave his house at all that night, and the next day he drove out to Bristol, Florida to visit a girlfriend. The problem with his alibi is that his cell phone records do not back it up. While the police have not said much, they did say that his cell phone pinged off a tower in Allie's neighborhood when he made that 12:47 call. He was not at his house. When confronted with this, Dwight stopped talking to the police, as was his right, and a search had been conducted of his home and his vehicle, with the police saying that they do have more information and evidence, but they are holding it back. Dwight does have a criminal record. He was convicted of an armed robbery when he was 17 or 18, and he spent nearly 5 years locked up for that. He had been out for just over 2 years when he met Allie, but other than a significant number of traffic citations, he has not been in any other legal trouble that I could find, and he has since become a registered nurse. The police have a theory that Allie was lying in bed reading when her phone rang. It was Dwight, and he said he was outside. She left in a car with him and was never seen again. The reason for releasing this new information in 2021 was to ask the public for tips, particularly about Dwight Aldridge. And that's why I keep naming him. I will often withhold the names of people involved in cases who have not been convicted of a crime, whether they were a witness or a suspect. I do this to protect their privacy in a digital world. My podcast is small in the grand scheme of things, but if I found out someone's privacy was invaded because I named them on my podcast, I would feel terrible. But this is a request for information directly coming from the authorities, so I am using his full name. And Dwight is aware he was named a suspect. About 10 days after they named him in October of 2021, he posted a meme to his public Facebook account that says, quote, "The face you make knowing they talking," end quote, with the hashtag unbothered. According to the phone records, Dwight was in Allie's neighborhood on the night of February 2nd, going into February 3rd, 2006. He said he then drove to Bristol, Florida, which is an hour west of Tallahassee, and it takes you mostly through rural areas. Dwight is innocent until proven guilty, and it has been nearly 3 years since he was named a suspect, and there has not even been an arrest, let alone a conviction. But if you do have any information regarding Dwight Aldridge, his movements in early February 2006, unusual activity in the area between Tallahassee and Bristol, or just general information on the disappearance of Allie Gilmore, you are asked to call the Tallahassee Police Department at 850-891-4200, or you can leave an anonymous tip with Crime Stoppers at 850-574-TIPS. And as always, this information will be in the show notes. Thank you for listening. If you want more content, check out my other show, Crimelines and Consequences, wherever you get your podcasts. I also offer bonus content and ad-free listening at patreon.com/crimelines or through the Apple Podcast app. If you want to buy me a coffee, the official drink of Crimelines, you can give a one-time donation at basement4productions.com/support.